Hi guys, and welcome to this session. In the last session we were looking at things such as the order, renaming, color coding and removing the silence, and in this one we're going to look at a few more things such as timing and tuning. So if I just drag these tracks open, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and really these sort of things should be done in the production phase, but it's always good to check. And what we're doing here with the timing is we're checking the timing of these values. So you can see here we've got a stereo closed hat. We can see the difference between the left and the right channel here. And we're just checking with how it compares to other tracks. So here we can compare it to our percussion, and we can also compare it to things such as the open hat. And we're looking at that sort of relative relationship between these two parts or multiple parts. The best way of checking the timing is to solo the two parts you want to check and then just listen to them against each other. And what we can then do if we need to is we can either use the track delay, or we can nudge the whole clip forward or back, or we can warp the samples if we need to. And listening is much better than just looking visually, because a lot of the time we'll find with some samples such as hats, and especially things like claps and snares, is they will actually be slightly ahead of the beat just to let them snap before the kick drum. So don't jump to conclusions when you look at the samples and see that they're not lining up perfectly, and it's always better to listen as well. The next thing we need to check is the tuning. And when I say tuning, I'm saying that on a sort of macro level and also on a micro level as well. So we're talking about in the actual tuning is in which key signature is it in, and do all the parts conform to that key signature. And I'm also talking about the micro tuning on a cent level, making sure it's actually in the right key. So what we can do is we can set this into low frequency inspection mode, and we can see our kick there hitting on G. So what we can now do is we can go and check the notes in our bass line to see where they're hitting, and then we can try and figure out the key signature from there. Bearing in mind that just because our kick is in G doesn't mean that our track's key signature is G, because that kick might be tuned to a different note than the root note. So that's the basics for the macro tuning, as in the key or the scale, and the other type of tuning is the micro tuning. So what I mean by this is predominantly the low end, so you're talking your kick and your bass, and it's making sure that these two are blending and gelling well together. So if they are, say, a fifth apart, or if they're on the root note, making sure that they are bang on that note and they're not either too sharp or too flat. And if you don't know what I'm on about, then just go into the clip view, and then what you can do is you can transpose the fine tuning. You can actually change the fine tuning in cents, and if you just push that up between maybe a semitone up and then a semitone down, and you listen to how that sounds against the kick or against the bass, then you'll see what I mean. And if you don't have these two elements tuned properly, then you're going to really struggle to get these two elements to slot together and sound nice and gelled and cohesive. The next thing to mention is to make sure that your project tempo is set the same as it was for the production process. And the reason this is because we've got the warp turned off. So if we start changing the tempo, you can see this is stretching our clips, which means they're not going to match up to the beat or bar positions that they're supposed to. The next thing I'm going to do is just also rename our reference rough here as well, just so it's all nice and neat, as is the other references. So I'm just going to call ref rough, and then we'll say the track tempo or the project tempo and the key as well, just so we can see it at a glance. And now we're going to move on to setting up our buses and our routing. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to set up some auxiliary buses. So all that is a normal audio track, and we'll just rename this to low end bus. And then we'll set the colour to black, and I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to make a few more buses. So we're going to have the percussion bus, and then I'm also going to have the synth bus and the vocal bus, and we might have some more later. And then we'll go into session view, just so it's easier to change. If we open up the mixer, we set these monitors to in, so that means they're constantly monitoring, which turns them into a auxiliary bus. So now what we can do is we can select some of our tracks, and we can route the information from these tracks into our buses. So now everything is going to go through these buses. So just really quickly speed this process up. And all I'm doing here is I'm setting the audio to on all of our tracks to the relevant bus. And then on the buses, I'm setting the audio from to no input. And now you can see we've got our vocal bus, our synth bus, percussion bus, and our low end bus. And the reason these are useful is it means that we can affect at a bus level if we want to help glue a set of sounds together. And as well as that, if we have a good balance, say on our percussion bus, and we don't want to change the balance, but we want to increase the level of the percussion, we can now do that just by nudging up one of the buses instead. So now that we've grouped our tracks to their buses, what I'm also going to do is make some return tracks. So using Command Alt and T here, I've made 4 return tracks. I'm going to name this room reverb, then we'll have a large reverb, a plate reverb, and then a delay. And we'll actually go into how we're going to use these effects or how we're going to set them up later. But for now, all I want to do is get some on there. So when we decide we need a reverb when we're mixing, we can just use one and it's ready to go. So firstly, let's just color code these so they're a little bit clearer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get a Convolution Reverb Pro and set that up on these reverb returns. Then all I'm going to do is put one on each of these tracks, and I'm just going to turn it off for now, just so it's not eating up CPU, because the Convolution Reverb Pro is quite a CPU intensive plugin. So I'm just going to paste this across, and we're just going to use fairly default settings. So I'm just going to load up a standard hall. I'm going to do the same for the plate, and then we'll just load up a simple delay as well. Quite a common thing to do at this stage is to set up a sidechain trigger track, and we're not going to need one because we're going to be using Nicky Romero's Kickstart, but I'll just show you. If you make a new MIDI track, as we've got here, I'm just going to drag this up to the top and then set it up with the rest of our parts and our references so it's out of the way. And what this is going to be used for is for things like sidechain compression. So what we can do is we can put some notes, some MIDI notes all the way throughout the project in here, and then we can get the certain sidechain compressors to use this as its trigger or its like ghost trigger track. So what we do with this MIDI track is we place a simpler into it or a sampler, and then we can choose a trigger sample, and usually you want quite a tight sample. So things like hats make quite good samples, or some people use the actual kick sample so they know the exact envelope that's being used. And then once we've got this in place, all we've got to do is create a MIDI clip, and then we're just going to put in a quarter note beat or whatever sort of sidechained groove or whatever beat you want the compressor to sidechain by. Then you just put that all the way along the arrangement, and then once you've done that, all you've got to do is then you can either mute the output of this track, or you can set it to sends only, and that way it's not going to come out through the master channel, and you can use it as your ghost sidechain trigger. So that's a way of doing a sidechain, but I'd recommend Kickstart or Xfuzz LFO tool. So the next thing is that if we go to our arrangement, you'll see the parts. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can't actually see the parts anymore. So what we can do is we can set up arrangement markers so we can see where we are at all times. But before we do that, what we need to do is we need to leave a gap at the start of our mixdown. The reason we do that is because what I was saying about earlier is sometimes we shave a few samples off the first kick or the transient of the first kick. So if we just move this a few bars forward, then we're going to leave a little bit of dead space and prevent that from happening. And now what we can do is we can put in the arrangement markers after we've done this, and the arrangement markers are going to be in the right position for our track. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to fast forward this part, and I'm just going to place in these markers, which can also be key mapped as well and renamed, just like I am here. And that allows us to just jump through the project really quickly using hotkeys if we'd like to. And also if we scroll down to the bottom, we can now see where we are in the arrangement, anywhere we are in the project. So a handy little thing now with Ableton is we have this second window in the view options. And so this is really good if you've got dual monitors, and it's just going to open a second window of Ableton, so you can put things such as imaging and metering plugins on your master. And this allows you to be able to meter any of your tracks by just using the solo function, rather than having to put loads of CPU intensive metering plugins on loads of individual tracks. So it's just a good thing to have open at all times, and it's just going to help you start to understand the frequency spectrum and the metering of all of your tracks and your project. So here I'm using some pretty standard go-to metering things. So we've got Voxendio Span here, which is just a spectrum analyzer. We've got an oscilloscope. We've got Brainworks Digital, which is just a really good meter for things like peak, RMS. We have the Isotope Ozone Imager here, so it's just got a good little vector scope on it, which is going to show us the stereo imaging. And as well as that, there's plenty of other plugins we can use, which I'll go through as we're doing this, but these are the sort of ones that I'd look to and have open in another window so I can see exactly what's going on at all times as we work through our track, and it's just much more useful for picking out any problems nice and early. So I'll go into these plugins in a bit more depth as and when we use them, but something to bear in mind here is that at the moment our references aren't going through these metering plugins. So if you want to do comparative referencing or comparative metering, looking at things like the tonal balance and the stereo image, you will actually have to get the references to go through the master. and then any master processing you have on is going to affect them. So that's why I don't recommend using any master processing on the master bus throughout the mixdown stage. And another thing to mention here is that these plugins have been set, so I've got all of my plugin windows open and they're not going to auto hide. And you can change that in the preferences if you don't have dual monitors and you've got a small screen. So you only have one plugin window open at a time, or that you hide them when you click off them or click into the Ableton project window. So that's just something to note as well. And many of these plugins can be resized to be bigger or smaller. The final thing I want to talk about is glue compression or master bus compression. This is usually safe for the mastering engineer, but some people like a little bit of glue at the end of their mix. If you know what you're doing, that's fine, but if you don't, then I wouldn't use it. Some people like to mix into a compressor, so they'll put the compressor on right at the very start, or maybe even a limiter as well, and they will mix or they'll balance into that. But I don't think it's a good idea because you can't really judge what you're doing, and it's going to act a bit sporadically as opposed to if you're just normally mixing. So you're not going to be able to judge what's going on with the compressor or what's going on with your balance. And then if you turn this compressor off, usually your mix falls apart. So I'd say get the best balance you possibly can, and then if you want to put a compressor on, then do so, and then you just have to readjust the balance slightly. What's a better thing to do is just to use the buses that we set up earlier. If you want a bit of a mix cohesion or a little bit of glue, then use compression on those buses, and that's going to pull those sounds together within the bus rather than slamming it on the master, because I can promise you the mastering engineer isn't going to be too happy with you if you've squashed all the dynamics out of your track right at the very last stage. If you are comfortable with using glue compression on the master bus, then just make sure that you keep it fairly light, so only a couple of decibels maximum, and make sure you set the attack and release times so you're not going to squash the transients or cause any audible ducking or pumping. So just to recap on everything we've done so far within the mix preparation stage, here's a little checklist for you that you can work through on your own track. And now that we've finished the mix preparation, what we can do is start getting into the meaty part of the mixdown stage, such as the gain staging, balance and stereo image.